So for those of you who haven't joined a Green Hour session before, so I'm Manon, I'm the manager from Home North, and the BFI FAN Green Hour sessions are online learning series for film exhibitors, and those sessions are focusing on environmental sustainability in the sector. This is a nationwide program that is open to all members of the regional and national film hubs. Please note that closed captions are available throughout the session, so if you need to use them, you can click on the CC button in the lower right corner of the screen. The webinar is recorded and will be made available later on the Bigger Picture YouTube channel. And today we are joined by Danielle Pipe, Sustainability Coordinator at Julie's Bicycle, and Zoe Rabash, Climate Action Researcher at Watershed. Hi both, thanks for waving at the camera. So in this conversation, Daniel and Zoe will discuss how to track your organization's environmental impact with sustainability reporting tools to help you better understand your energy use and make the case for your venue or your festival or your organization to be supported in its green journey. We also have a special recorded presentation from Lizzie Moran, who is the Head of Technical Resources at Midland Arts Centre in Birmingham. There will be plenty of time for questions after the presentation, so please drop your question in the Q&A function. If you have any other question or issues, I will be moderating the chat as well, so you can just send help by messaging me directly. But I will now hand it over to Danielle first. Hi, Danielle.
Thanks, Manon. I will share. Okay. Hi everyone, nice to have everyone join us today. So I'm going to start off with a really, right at the beginning, looking at carbon impact reporting and why it's important, and how to get started. So starting right at the beginning with what is a carbon footprint. So it's a really good measure of looking at your organization's activities, an individual's activities or an event, and the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are produced by this. So generally it will be measured as a unit of CO2e. So this means carbon dioxide equivalent, and this just basically pulls together all greenhouse gases into one unit under the main greenhouse gas, which is carbon dioxide. And this will usually be a measure of kilograms or tons. So why should you be looking at measuring your environmental impact in this way? So it can be really good tool to help you look at your main impact areas. So it can help you prioritize your actions by understanding where your impact is coming from in terms of your activities, thinking about priorities and where to focus your action, looking at opportunities for reducing impact and saving money as well in the process, setting targets and tracking progress along the way so you can see your impact changing and increasing or decreasing year on year depending on what you're reporting on. And you can also bring it into your comms and your awareness raising by using the data, the quantitative data, and also some potentially qualitative data to tell your story around the actions you're taking and what impact this is having in your work. And there's also global industry and employee expectations and standards that we're seeing. So on a global level, thinking about this collective responsibility, this isn't just down to you as an organization yourselves, but there are a lot of global policies and actions that are happening. You may have seen news from the recent climate conference, COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan, with global leaders coming together to think about the actions that we can all take on a national level to be able to support our climate action. And then on an industry level, there are certain schemes and groups coming together to support aims and goals for how we can all work towards more sustainable activities and improving the environmental impact of our work. And more locally, on an employee and customer level, there is a lot of need and want from customers to see that organisations are taking positive climate action. So there's a survey by an organisation called Act Green where they looked at the importance of the climate crisis to customers. So they found that 87% of cultural audiences specifically are worried about the climate crisis. And along with that, 77% of those feel that cultural organisations have a responsibility to influence society to make radical change. And that's a really powerful element that the screen sector and cultural industries generally have to influence audiences, influence and connect with hearts and minds to ensure that people start to have sustainability action on their radar and can look at the changes that we can make individually and more collectively to support a more sustainable future. So generally, when we look at what is included in a carbon footprint, this can be everything across our whole activity as an organisation. So this diagram is from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is a global standard for measuring climate impact. You don't have to use this one specifically, but it just shows you what is involved in a carbon footprint. So with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, they split everything into 3 scopes. So scope 1 are your more direct impacts, which are related to your organisational activity. For example, heating within company buildings and energy use there, and any company vehicles which are owned and run as part of the company's fleet. Then scope 2 is any purchased electricity for heating or cooling. Scope 3 covers everything else. So this is a really broad category, covers things such as waste management, business and audience travel, and procurement. So scope 3 is where, as an organisation, you may have a bit less direct control over. But it's also really important to remember that carbon footprints aren't the only thing that we can do and the main thing to focus on within our sustainable action. So there's a lot of a bigger aspect that we need to focus on when we're thinking about what we're looking at here. So in terms of overconsumption and resource scarcity, thinking about affordable goods and services, air pollution, water security, health, education, and poverty, all of these things need to come into our thinking when we're looking at our environmental work. So your carbon footprint is just one part of your action. So don't focus solely on your carbon footprint. It's a very important and very useful tool to use as part of your wider environmental work. So where to get started? We're going to look right at the very beginning, how to sort of evaluate your organisation and your activity to think, to think about how you can look at your carbon impact. So initially, you really want to review all of your organisational activities and who you work with. So you need to understand your activities and where your potential impact might be. And also thinking about who you work with and where you can potentially get this data from, who you need to talk to, who you need to work with. This may be your partners, suppliers, your property landlord, facilities managers. Some data will be easier to gather than others. And the data gathering aspect of this work is probably the most challenging area. So consider all of these questions: who you are, what you do, when you do it, where, how, and with whom, and thinking about those impact areas, as well as what you're already doing. So you may already be taking action and you may not have started to measure it yet. So really starting to think about that already. You may have certain areas which are more relevant, such as business travel or audience travel, or you may have a lot of activities held in a building. and then thinking about which data is the easiest to gather. And you may need to research this a bit, and you may discover that you can gather audience travel or business travel data more easily than buildings energy data, for example. So that's where you should start. So skipped ahead a bit there. Thinking about the data you have. So this may be clearly seen on your energy and water bills, for example, and you may easily just be able to input this into an online carbon calculator tool. You may see this on your waste invoices, or you may need to work with other people to gather this data. Generally, business and audience travel information can be the most straightforward to gather because you just need the distance travelled and the mode of transport used. Otherwise, you may want to be speaking to your waste management company, your landlord, your facilities manager, and you may also want to look at supplier policies. And then it's also a really good idea to gain a wider perspective and talk to more people, organisations, potential partners that you work with to find out what people are doing and what their challenges they've had, the successes they've had with this work, if they've even thought about it. So it's a great idea to look for examples of what other organisations are doing and how they're doing it to see what is possible. For example, Julie's Bicycle website has lots of resources of lots of different types of organisations and the work that they've been doing. And also speaking to your suppliers and partners. Is this something they're already thinking about? Do they have a sustainability policy? And how can you work together to support each other with your environmental work? And then once you've got all this data and you've started to calculate your impact, how can you use this? So there are lots of different carbon calculator tools, and I'll show you the Julie's Bicycle one in a moment. So it can really help you to understand the main impact areas that are producing the most emissions, and that can help you understand where to focus, inform your action. You may need to report this for funding requirements, so you can have a greater understanding of your environmental impact and the activities that are producing certain emissions. And also looking at any areas where there may be gaps in training, you may need to provide more support for your employees. And again, telling your story, so how you can bring this into your comms. And I'm going to show you a few examples of this in a minute, of some great examples of where environmental data from organisations has been pulled together to show impact that came from certain events. So this is a really, really key area to think about when you're doing any environmental work within your organisation or measuring your impact. So thinking about the areas that are most relevant to you and which areas are within your influence or your control. So in terms of data, which data is easier for you to collect? Which areas will you have the most control over influencing? Creative organisations have a great level of influence that we don't want to underestimate, but there are going to be areas that we don't have control over. In terms of local infrastructure or public transport accessibility, especially at the moment, we can influence this and we can work to campaign for better support and infrastructure there. But it's really good to focus on where you have direct control in the short term. So focusing your data collection and measuring on the areas that are most meaningful, and thinking about the data you can collect beyond just the quantitative carbon figures, and looking at the wider story that you can focus on. So some of the key areas you might want to look at to start measuring are your energy use, if you're in a building, or if you're doing activities elsewhere, how you can get some energy figures for that data. Water use, your waste use, business travel, fleet travel. So this is any vehicles that are a part of your organisation's fleet and owned by your organisation. And even audience travel. Let's not forget that if our cultural events weren't happening, there would be no additional audience travel. So we do need to consider that as part of our organisation's impact as well. And then thinking about the people you need to work with to potentially get some of this data. So when we look at the figures that come out of any carbon footprint calculation, there's obviously a wider story that goes with that. And that's also a really key thing to be thinking about. So your carbon footprint will reveal what your impact is, but it won't tell you the whole story. So you might need to dig a little bit deeper into the information and the data you've collected and any actions that you've taken to understand why there might have been a change in certain figures. So some examples here that 5,600 tonnes of CO2 came from energy use. They found this was an increase from last year, and that was because of a change in opening hours. So that makes sense. 430 tonnes of waste, which was a decrease on last year, but they're still only recycling 30%. So there's some more digging that needs to happen around why this decrease in waste production happened. In terms of water, they had 38.5 million litres used, which was a decrease, but they're not exactly sure why. So this is something to think about for the next year and measuring data there. And in terms of travel, an organisation may have measured by their expenditure, but it's a big percentage of their total budget. So it shows that more investigation and research needs to go into finding out why that is such a big part of their total budget and their emissions. This is a good specific example from Walk the Plank, who did an event called Green Spaces, Dark Skies, and they pulled together additional data alongside their carbon footprint impact, which showed, gave a bit of context to why the figures showed what they did in terms of using local suppliers, like 71% of suppliers came from within 50 miles, that they reduced their food impact by ensuring a 50-50 split between vegetarian and meat meals, looking at green energy within accommodation, and just looking at the story behind the numbers really gave them an opportunity to contextualize the carbon figures and provide a story for the people who were involved in the event and the environmental impact there. Again, an example from Shambhala. So you may not find that you get a neat baseline straight away when you first start calculating. Between the first year and the second year, you may actually find that your impact increases, because if you start measuring more areas and you find you understand a bit more and you can get more of the data more easily. And this is what happened with Shambhala Festival. So Shambhala Festival have been calculating their impact for years. They are steaming ahead with their environmental work, but between 2022 and 2023, they actually found an increase in their carbon footprint due to them being able to more easily measure certain areas and be able to split them out more clearly. So initially they could measure audience travel very easily, and then they had everything else piled together. And then in 2023, they were able to more easily separate out all their emissions, measure more areas more easily. And so they did see quite a large increase on their carbon footprint, but they were able to explain this and talk about it and bring it into their comms and the story they were telling. So when thinking about measuring your carbon footprint, initially, I would say don't try to measure everything. Focus on the most important areas. Look at all the different areas that you can measure and which areas might be more easy to gather the data for, and focus on those to start with. And look at improving your data over time. So if some areas such as your building's energy might be more challenging initially, you can build on that year on year. Engage with people who have the information, speak to partners and suppliers to get certain data, and take action in the meantime. So measurement isn't everything in terms of your environmental work. You can act now on certain areas, whether you can measure it or not. So I'm going to quickly show you the Julie's Bicycle Creative Climate Tools. So these are an online, freely available, creative industries focused carbon calculator tools that can help you get started and help you understand your impact a bit more clearly. So it can pull together all of your different activity areas, give you a total of your carbon emissions in terms of your activity across a year, across certain activities, and you can clearly see here the impacts that different activity areas are having. In terms of areas of the tools, you can measure your energy use, your water, your waste, audience travel, business travel, and fleet travel. And there are lots of different options for different energy use and travel. So there are areas to input data in terms of buildings and projects. So if you're not buildings based and you want to measure things such as events or tours, you can separate those out and measure different areas. And then, as we've mentioned, looking at beyond the carbon emissions data, there is also the Beyond Carbon checklist, which may give you some inspiration. It can help you track your progress on different areas that you can take to help support your environmental work and your action to reducing your impact and emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. That was great. It was really thorough as well. Maybe there will be no question because you've been so thorough. I'm just going to share my screen now. If you don't mind. Okay, perfect. Right, can you see my screen?
Hello, my name is Lizzie Moran, and Film Hub North have asked me to talk through some of the ways we've been measuring our energy and our emissions. I'm from Midlands Arts Centre, also known as MAC. We're an arts centre based in Birmingham, just south of the city centre. We do a real variety of things. So we've got our cinema here. We've also got several theatre spaces on site and several galleries. We do a really wide variety of workshops, from ceramics to dance to jewellery making, painting. And we are open 364 days a year. The only day we're shut is Christmas Day. So we are really well used and well visited, and our energy consumption will reflect that. My name's Lizzie, as I said. I'm head of technical resources here, and I'm also one of the sustainability leads. So I am in a very good position to understand the energy use throughout. We have been using Julie's Bicycle's creative climate tools to measure our scope 1 and 2 emissions since 2012. So we have a really good idea of how much energy we're using on site, and also to show that we are reducing things. This is a graph showing our reduction from 2018-19. So you can see the pandemic here is obvious, but we really have been making progress in reducing both gas and electricity. And having the creative climate tools is useful so that we know that what we're doing is having an effect. So without these measurements, we wouldn't know whether what we're doing is working or not. We've done this through a few capital improvements. We got new boilers during the pandemic, and that's helped a lot. We also have looked at LED lighting, some other plant improvements, but it doesn't have to be capital. Some of the stuff we're looking at has been through behaviour change, making sure things are switched off when they should be, and really making sure our building management system is working as efficiently as it can be. This graph is another one. I do sub-meter readings every week. So I've got a really good idea about where in the building is using different sorts of energy. So this is a sub-meter that covers part of the foyer. So it's mainly lighting. We had a grant from the Theatres Trust earlier this year, and we replaced quite a lot of the foyer lighting with LED. And this graph really shows that it has had an impact on our amount of energy use. So the blue line is before the lighting change and the orange line is afterwards, which is about a 20% reduction in this particular area of the building. So that's about 115 kilowatt hours per week, about £27.50 a week. So not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things, but it will make a difference over the year. As I say, we're open every week, so that will build up. So I wanted to talk a little bit about funders and what they expect from you. And we're finding that when applying for funding, they really do want to know exactly how much energy you'll save compared to what you've got now. So you need to use the data you've got. Obviously, I've got sub-meter data, but a really quick and easy way of measuring how much energy something's using is buying this plug-in meter. So the picture on the left is a plug-in meter that I bought for £10 off Amazon. I was trying to work out how much energy a particular fridge used, because we're hoping to replace a lot of our catering fridges, which are quite old and inefficient. So I plugged that in. After a certain amount of time, day, a week, it'll tell you how much energy that fridge has used. And then you can use that with the data from the new appliance and really tell funders how much you're likely to save. The other thing they're likely to want to know about is how it fits into your ongoing plans. So earlier this year, we developed a carbon management plan, which commits to a 50% reduction in scopes 1 and 2 by 2030 compared to a 2019 baseline. And we use a lot of resources from the Gallery Climate Coalition for that. That's an organisation that's mainly concentrated on the visual arts sector, but actually is got some quite useful resources that I think is useful for a lot of sectors. And finally, I just wanted to talk about the Transforming Energy programme from Julie's Bicycle, which we've just taken part in. It was called Capital Investment Ready, and it does what it says in the tin, really. It's preparing you for capital investment into energy improvement. This was in collaboration with a company called Pilio, who do energy monitoring as well. The Capital Investment Ready programme for us really helped us think about the long-term strategy for moving away from fossil fuels and what big changes we'll need to make, because all of those improvements we are making currently, we're going to run out of them soon. We've done the sort of easier programme, and now we're going to have to really think about decarbonising, getting away from the gas boilers, and for us that's to do with the fabric first approach of insulation. The other thing the Capital Investment Ready programme was really useful was getting some buy-in from senior management. It does help to have an external organisation to help convince people that what you're doing is absolutely the right thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm now going to prompt Zoe to follow up on that.
Hey, let me just get my screen sorted. Give me a second. Okay, does that all look fine?
Great.
Okay, great. Hey everyone, I'm Zoe. I'm action researcher at Watershed and Pervasive Media Studio based in Bristol. We're a multi-art centre. I joined Watershed in 2019, so I'm going to be kind of reflecting on our process since 2019 and kind of starting to take our carbon accounting more seriously. You're going to be hearing a lot of the similar messages that you heard from Danielle, and I now can't remember who just did the presentation, but very similar, except my presentation is probably a bit more rambly and scrambly because that's kind of how our journey's been, to be honest. And yeah, to start with, I'm just gonna this is our 2024 and will be our 2025 priorities as an organization. And it's taken us a long time to narrow down and start really kind of focusing our capacity and focusing our resource on 4 key areas. And a huge part of being able to get to this way more focused and way more engaged approach across the organization has been carbon accounting, but also the process of onboarding the whole organization to this carbon accounting process. So I'll explain a little bit about what I mean now. But just to kind of start with, I guess when I joined in 2019, it was a big year for climate action. If anyone remembers, obviously COVID happened right after, so sometimes it's hard to remember. But 2019, there was the huge mobilizations from Extinction Rebellion, from Fridays for Future, and then also the Culture Declare. I think most relevant to this sector, obviously, is the Culture Declares movement, where a wave of organizations, including Watershed, declared a climate emergency, committing to the target of reaching net zero emissions by 2030. Since in the 5 years since we've made that declaration, and we've learned a little bit more about what actually net zero means and what actually carbon reduction looks like, we're now having a process of like really reflecting on that goal and thinking about how do we make it more realistic, more ambitious, and also not necessitate offsetting. But that's probably a hour-long discussion for another day. But just to say that I think a big part of the process of understanding your carbon emissions is really being able to reflect and iterate what your goals are. And so I think when that goal was set, nobody in the organization had their head round of what emissions really meant. But basically, when I joined, we'd been reporting to Julie's Bicycle for about 6 years, I think. Which was important. It was good. There was an onus, to be thinking about broadly, our operations, our buildings, and lowering our emissions. But because it was kind of seen as a chore, or kind of seen as like one of those reporting tasks, it's like, oh, we just got to get it done, like around April, May, we just got to get it done. And like, there's so much other stuff happening that it was being held by like one or two people. And although we were doing this kind of accounting process on our scope 1 and 2s, it really wasn't like disseminating out. It really wasn't informing any decision making. It was kind of just there. And so we all kind of thought, okay, this isn't helpful. Like it's taking up a bunch of capacity and it's not even informing decision making. So how can we get really like stuck in with our carbon accounting emissions and help figure out a way for it to inform our decision making? And the first thing that we had to think about seriously was our scope 3 emissions, which Danielle's helpfully kind of taken us through. And scope 3 emissions are really hard to get your head around. Like it's one thing measuring, your building, your utilities, but getting your head around your scope 3s was really difficult. So we decided to initially work, I think it was in middle of 2020, with an organization called Earthly, just to do a kind of snapshot. Okay, we'll take 2018, 2019 as our new baseline year. And we'll get our heads around our scope 3, and then we'll be able to report that to Julie's Bicycle. But we just need a bit of help figuring out what we're going to do. And this was really helpful in a sense. The main thing that it was helpful for was realizing all the data that we couldn't capture or we hadn't been able to capture. So it was a really interesting picture, and it kind of threw us actually. And we were like, oh my God, like, okay, if we're thinking about, what action we need to do and where our capacity and resource need to be, we've got to, really diversify and focus on a bunch of different things. But the issue was that because this was a snapshot, just 1 year, we didn't have anything to compare it to. And so we actually were sort of led down a sort of fake rabbit hole. Because in the environment group, we kind of ran this and we were looking at the scope 3s and we were like, okay, wow, business travel. Wow, that's huge. It's 21% of our 22% of our emissions. And that was insane. So we were like, okay, well, business travel feels like a really like tangible one. So we made all these different priorities and made all these different action plans. But then when we were talking to people throughout the organization, 2018 and 2019 had been a kind of very unique year because we'd run an international program, which we'd never done before and we never did again, called Creative Producers International, where we had held the budget for a bunch of artists flying around the world, basically. So it was kind of like a red herring almost. And I think that really speaks to like why you really need to do this in consecutive years in order to have a really solid understanding and plan of what you're doing. And so once we realized that, we were like, okay, we really need to get our heads around this. We can't outsource someone to do this for us. We need to be having a solid method for consecutive years where we are bringing in relevant people from the organization. So we're not only capturing the data, but we're kind of understanding where the data changes are coming from. And so we decided that we were going to work with a carbon consultant called CLD Carbon. And I understand this is a bit of a privilege to be able to work with a consultant on this. And I realize that not every organization has the resource and capacity to, but we did it for a very specific reason, which was that at the time, while the creative climate tools were great for scope 1 and scope 2s, it was quite difficult for us as a multi-arts organization with a cafe bar, a cinema, office spaces, creative technology studio. Now we have an exhibition space as well. We also had rented spaces. It wasn't quite translating. It was really hard for us to kind of take what we were seeing as the actual data and translating it onto the creative tools at the time. That has changed since then because the tools have been updated. But we were like, okay, we really want to just understand this ourselves. So we worked with CLD Carbon to develop a kind of like just a simple methodology for us to capture all of the data. And really key part of this was it wasn't just like me and it wasn't just like our utilities manager. We got representatives from a bunch of different departments to do this process with us so that different areas of the organization responsible for collecting the data understood what they were collecting and why, but also they could see the parts of their department they're responsible for, what kind of the impact of that was. So that was really helpful in that sense. But it also stopped the issue of like just two people, someone from our finance team, being really stressed at the end of the year and it not ever getting disseminated out. So it kind of had a dual purpose. And also, yeah, part of that was setting up a kind of an annual check-in in terms of logging this data so that we didn't all become like a nightmare at the end where we're scrabbling around and doing a kind of shoddy job. And so we now have this situation where we have a kind of spreadsheet where everybody knows what they're responsible for. We have quarterly check-ins, people plug in the different bits of data they're responsible for. So it's way more disseminated. And also then it kind of chucks out the numbers that we need to pop into Julie's Bicycle and also to the other organizations that we're publicly report to. So for instance, we're part of Bristol Climate Leaders Group and they have a different reporting tool, so we can just fill in those numbers there. The key thing that's been really important for this is it's really helped us refine our action priorities from what was like quite scattered, like, oh my God, we need to do everything, to be like, okay, these are clearly our big emission areas. And we've done quite a lot of the low-hanging fruit now. So actually, these are really long-term goals where we might not see the emissions reductions year on year. And so we can't be disappointed if it's kind of stagnant for a little while, or even actually our emissions go up as we get better at reporting. Because kind of as has been previously mentioned, once you start doing more accurate reporting and taking on more things that you're reporting through in your scope threes, your emissions footprint actually grows, which can be disheartening. So there's kind of an understanding now that we're working on the big picture stuff that will take a longer amount of time. I'll just kind of run you through what our from last year, so what our 23-24 footprint was, which was actually amazing because our footprint was down 1%, which we really had readied ourselves not to have. I know 1% doesn't seem very big, but we were expecting like a rise because, you know, we were our ambition around carbon accounting had grown, and also we were still recovering post-pandemic and audiences were growing. So we really are taking this as a win. So as you can see here, this is about the equivalent of 257 return flights from London to New York. Is our annual footprint. I'll just, oh, what's happened here? I'll just okay, no worries. Yeah, just in a bit more detail. So as you can see, clearly some bigger areas have emerged, right? We've got our utilities and our food and drink, and look at this over here. That 20% business travel actually is 1.36%. So that's why it's really important to do this kind of consecutive calculations and reporting of scope 3 so that you don't get kind of down a rabbit hole. This is our over time. So since we started reporting with Julie's Bicycle in 2012, and up until 2019, we really were only reporting our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And yeah, I mean, I think a big focus for us has been to see this decrease here is we were doing a lot of what was mentioned previously. We kind of electrified our kitchens, we replaced our boilers, we've got new aircon, so much more efficient throughout the building. Also some work around behavior change. We upgraded our toilets to be gender neutral, but as we did that, we also made them more energy and water efficient. So kind of all of these changes have played a huge part in bringing down our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, even though they look like they've gone up, we're just better at reporting them now. This is what we have as a breakdown of our top 10 carbon emitters. This is really helpful. Again, just kind of re-emphasizes where we really need to focus on. But also we found that this was actually really helpful to share in our all staff meetings so that different areas of the organization can have like a tangible understanding of where our big emissions are coming from. So for instance, our cafe bar staff found it really interesting, like the oil was really high up there, and like, can we think creatively about using less oil within our cooking and within our menu? And, you know, after seeing how high the beef burger and the beef was on this, we then straight away were able to bring in a plant-first menu, which is where we still have our meat options, but we prioritize our vegetarian and vegan options at the top of the menu in order to kind of like do a little bit of like influencing the customers. Yes, this is kind of different emissions areas and where they've changed, kind of just repeating what I've said before. And this is really where it's led us today. So our 2024 priorities. So you can understand why our building and procurement, these kind of much bigger, dicier, long-term focus areas are where we're going to be focusing on. It's where our major emissions are. It's where we have the most potential for change. Again, this is a kind of what was been mentioned before, like this is a huge project. We have to retrofit our entire building. We're in a historical grade 2 listed building, which means it's leaky as hell, it's energy efficient as hell. It was never meant to have all of this activity going on. And so we're really trying to think creatively, actually, because we were also part of the Capital Investment Ready program that was mentioned previously. So we're currently fundraising and planning and scoping for our very ambitious retrofit program, which we're calling Wild and Generous Watershed, where we don't just want to retrofit our building, but we really want to kind of, if we're going to do this, let's do this right, and let's really make a building for the future where future Bristolians living under climate crisis can find refuge, and it can be a piece of cultural infrastructure that lasts a lot longer. And yeah, procurement, we're already using mostly local suppliers, to be honest. So we're working to engage our suppliers now around their supply chains, and also how we can actually reflect what buying local looks like in our carbon footprint, because we currently use standard carbon equivalents, which are made by the government, which are like an average, where actually using local suppliers will be much lower. So we're trying to figure out how to reflect that in our carbon accounting process. So it's likely actually our procurement emissions are much lower. We're just using kind of the averaged metrics rather than local metrics. All of this is a bit complicated and boring, but as you can see, it's a real journey. Once you start getting into it, it starts to unfold in front of you, and you start to realize, okay, there's really clear natural steps and natural focus areas that we should be focusing on. I hope that all made sense. I'll pass back to you, Manon.
Thank you so much. That was really, really useful. Do you mind also going back on camera, Danielle? Thank you. So yeah, it was really, really, really useful. Thank you so much to you both, and to Lizzie. I will pass that on as well. So I have a question around something that you touched upon a bit, Danielle. Obviously, it's a difficult time for the sector financially, and a lot of organizations really want to do better when it comes to the environment and like the sustainability of their buildings, of their activities. But there's also like a perceived and also real like short-term and sometimes mid-term costs that come with improving certain elements of your building. And do you have any like, is it something that you disagree with? Is it something that you have like practical steps for organizations that are like very limited in terms of resources on what they can do at a very like low-hanging fruit level without the impact? And also, I guess, changing that perception as well, like, because there is a lot of thing to be said about like reducing your energy, having both an environmental but also an economic impact. That was more of a comment than a question. Did I just do that?
Yeah, no, I can go on that. Yeah, I totally agree. There are organisations who are low on time, low on resource, low on capacity, and it's important to reflect that. But that there is a lot you can do, and there are a lot of actions that you can take initially that don't cost much, that can reduce costs in the long term. Looking at energy efficiency, water efficiency measures in the short term can be really powerful and actually have great impact. And other actions such as having a policy changing your food offering, as Zoe's mentioned, just thinking smaller and thinking about what is within your control again. So looking at what is within your direct control that you can do immediately, having a short-term and a long-term plan can really make a difference, and not trying to stretch yourself, remembering this is a collective action that we need every organisation to be a part of, and we need everyone to do what they can rather than a few organisations doing everything perfectly. So really focusing on what you can do and what you have control over initially.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, I completely agree, Danielle. I think it's so easy to get overwhelmed because there's so much stuff you can do and so much that feels out of reach, that I would like, my advice is, if you've got like, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by it, just choose like one area that's your focus area, because it's so much better to do even like marginal steps on like one focus area. Say it's like energy efficiency, like just forget about water and forget about food, forget about everything else for now. Just, it's much better to make marginal steps in one area, like for your mental health as well, because it's so easy for that like overwhelm to actually then be the stop to action. And I also think there's something that we've been thinking about Watershed a little bit, is like kind of following on from that Act Green report, Danielle, was like, oh wow, it is really, and the cinema one I think was really interesting because they've got specific stats on cinema audiences. So I think that'll be particularly relevant to this audience. So it's worth having a look at, is how engaged like cinema audiences are, and like how much action they want and how much they want to be involved. Like they want a communication of like what your thinking is and what your decision making is. And so we've been thinking about like, okay, our heating is a huge problem for us. It's a massive part of our footprint. Maybe part of this thing is we need to be having a conversation with audiences, is like, okay, we can turn our heating down a little bit and we'll give you guys some blankets. Is that cool? Like, are you guys cool with us like having the building a bit colder? Like that would, really help out on the carbon emissions, and we could make it a little bit snuggly in here. So there's things like that which can actually become maybe a bit more of a like fun way to bring in audiences to do some of the work for you and with you. Yeah, I don't know, but we're still kind of trying to figure that out. But it does seem like getting audiences involved can really help.
Yeah. And do you have some, like, I'm curious to see in terms of who engages with the creative climate tool. Like, I think it's a fantastic tool, and I know a lot of organizations use it because it's part of like a BFI award and agreement, and we've got like national portfolio organization as well who engage with that. I mean, and again, it's like it's not a show, and I think you made a really good case around like understanding like all the positive impact that it has. But I guess in terms of like for smaller organization, in terms of like capacity limitations as well, do you have any advice on like building capacity in your team, but also in terms of do you see like festivals, smaller organization, one screen cinema, volunteer-led societies, for instance, engage with a tool and benefit from it as well? Because that's a question from Danielle, but
Yeah. We do have smaller organisations using the tools in different ways with different capacity levels. And again, it just comes back to that focus element and just looking at what you can focus on and what is relevant to you and doing what you can. Again, pairing it with other actions, not just focusing on the tools. Personally, I feel like the tools are pretty user-friendly when you start to get used to them. We are developing some, currently, right at the moment, developing some bite-sized videos to go on our website. So it's going to run through every area of the tools, how to gather your data, how to input your data. And it's a journey. Sustainability is, we're not looking for an end goal. We're looking for those marginal improvements, as Zoe says, and just going on the tools one day, trying to figure it out, looking at how you can gather data, probably starting with travel data. I would always say is the easiest place to start because you can hopefully gather that quite easily, and then building on it and just gradually building on it, developing your learning, developing your understanding, and doing it as that team effort, not putting it all on one person who's already stretched.
I'll just add to that as well. Like, completely agree with Danielle. Like, I had a bunch of things I was going to say and they've all gone from my brain. I think some of the information is already being captured in different teams. So that's what we've really found. Like at Watershed, it's interesting because like we do report as a building-based large organization, but actually for some of our BFI programs, it almost is like when we're reporting a project, it's almost like a little separate bit. So it feels a bit more like what a smaller organization would need to do. And a lot of the stuff, actually, when we were figuring out how to carbon account for our BFI Academy short courses, some of that data was being captured anyway. And actually, a lot of projects, it's just about like, okay, as Danielle says, like looking at the travel, looking at the waste, and looking at like a couple of other things. And at the beginning of the project, being like, okay, can we just remember to like almost tally, like mark it down, it's a great place to start with the smaller project, just to figure out the tools and like what a method might be to like build it out. But you don't have to like do everything, as Danielle says, straight away. And like I think it is worth having the discussions with other team members, because we do so much reporting, and like a lot of that information will be captured somewhere as well. So you might even be reproducing work that's already happening. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think also making a clear case for, I think there's sometimes a feeling that we report, but like what is the action behind it? Like how is it useful? And I think there was a lot of like quite practical, like some good like tips and ideas on how to make that like palatable, how to like provide a story, how to like get some like buy-in from like partners, funders, stakeholders. And actually I have a question from someone in the audience around that. With Zoe, like Watershed is, in Bristol, and Bristol is kind of like one of the cities in the UK. It's like, oh, it's a green city. And do you have any advice, or like any examples of venues, organization that have been able to kind of like get local authorities in areas that maybe haven't done as much work, haven't done as much focus on the environment to get on board, like. And I think that also come back to what we were saying around like what's in your control, and then like the campaigning level in that donut that you showed, Danielle.
Just to clarify, do you mean like outside of the Bristol eco bubble, like organizations that have done a good job?
Yeah, or like also, or even examples from from you guys around like advocating for this in Bristol. Was it that like 10 years ago it wasn't the case, and you had to like really like work with local authorities, councils to like get them to engage with that? Or
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing to reference actually is the Culture Declares movement, which was a national movement, but that was like a call for Bristol City Council to make this declaration. And once Bristol City Council made the declaration, then all these other organizations kind of snowballed in terms of like, we are committing to, I can't remember the wording was exactly, but like, we are aligning with Bristol City Council's commitment. And that was really from like a grassroots movement push, if I'm being really honest. And that was not just in Bristol, that was all over the country, and cultural organizations all over the country. And so I think what's really important is like, if it doesn't feel like there's an existing network, there probably is. Like there will be like-minded organizations, if not next door to you, but like within, a certain radius, and they will have again, specific local knowledge in terms of like working with authorities and working with other like community-based organizations in the area. Like there are existing networks to tap into at this point. So you're not on your own. You really aren't on your own. Actually, 9 times out of 10, there's like someone you can copy. And also 9 times out of 10, there's someone who has an hour just thinking about, navigating these tools. Like I'm super happy at any point with anyone in this call if it took like half an hour to go through the tools together and be like, look, this is our experience with it. Like, and that I'm not the only one. I know there's plenty of those people. So kind of went rambling off topic there, guys. Sorry, I haven't had lunch, so I can feel myself kind of losing the thread. Danielle.
Yeah, I think there's that power of collective reporting that we're seeing a lot from the Arts Council programme and from the BFI programme. So we've had insights from everyone who has reported. I can speak specifically for BFI because I work more closely on that. But specifically with that programme, organisations who have reported on our tools, if we have that collective amount of data from multiple organizations, then we can see areas where organizations may need more support, and we can provide that as part of the program. For example, in terms of audience travel, we can provide some more support there. So it just gives us that bigger picture. And in terms of the Arts Council program, we release the Arts Council environmental report every year, and that shows a clear picture of the whole the large part of the creative sector, and where the changes are being made, where impacts are happening, and certain areas and it informs our support in terms of Julie's Bicycle, and it informs wider support and where we can look at campaigning for capital investment for certain organisations, whether that be energy, buildings, for example.
I also just had one more thought, which was like, yeah, in Bristol, in like Manchester, in lots of the major cities in London, there's these, you know, networks of like creative organizations who are working on this together. And I know that's not true of everywhere, but you also can look to like local business forums. Like nearly all, I think all local government strategies now have like a some form of net zero or decarbonization pathway where a big part of that is like working with businesses, and I think it's taking advantage of those opportunities as well, because a lot of these challenges are very, you know, unique to the art sector, but a lot of them are not. Like procurement is not one that is just us, and actually we have kind of an easier time of it sometimes than other businesses, so we can actually like take some of the lessons that they're doing and then pilot things, try things out in terms of bringing down procurement emissions or with local suppliers. So it's like taking a look around, I think, what local governments are offering in terms of like training programs, meetups, as well as, you know, local climate NGOs. They will have things as well. So it's worth looking outside of the art sector as well for these things.
Yeah, and on that as well, with I can see a lot of organizations sometimes kind of missing out on opportunities, also thinking about like funding, to actually go, like as you said, like outside of the art sector, and think about themselves as like businesses, which a lot of them are, and go for those pots of funding and those conversations on like procurement, energy that actually happening, as you said, like sometimes outside of the sector. And it's kind of like a good segue as well into some of the questions I had that were more practical around like any like database or any kind of like a list to refer to. So I'm linking back up also because we're coming to the end of the session on the sustainable screen resource on sustainable scream on Julie's Bicycle website. There's a section on funding as well that has a lot of things. And recently I was made aware of the new sustainable screen database on Screen Scotland's website as well, which has a database that is looking into becoming a comprehensive cross-disciplinary resource and knowledge exchange on stability, with academics, screen arts and industry professionals kind of sharing their expertise, their area of focus and their contact. And it's also like, yeah, going to be very wide with like some practical things like finding a location caterer, but also like sourcing expert contributors. So thinking about what we were saying also about capacity building, and like sometimes organization can't necessarily afford to have like a consultant, but I think Zoe also is something we've done with the Green Mentoring cohort, is kind of linking up university and experts in like in sustainability with organizations nearby, and kind of creating also like that positive and free advice, expertise, exchange of knowledge, which can be useful too. That was me rambling as well, because I also am hungry. But on that note, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. There's a few other sessions online on the Bigger Picture YouTube channel, including the last one on festival and stability. I know there was a few festival people joining today, so please do check that out if you haven't. And we'll be back in touch with another session very, very soon. And I also think, am I right to say it's tomorrow, the Julie's Bicycle webinar, Danielle?
Yes, tomorrow morning, buildings energy webinar. I can link that in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. I thought I had that open, but you might be quicker than me.
No, I don't have it. Have a look on the Julie's Bicycle website for the webinar.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you so much to you both. Thank you to everyone for attending. Yeah, take care. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.